Hi, welcome to Conscious Living Radio. I'm Tasha Simms.
And I'm Mark Karan.
And that track you just heard, Billie Holiday from back in 1939, about the lynching of Black Americans, Strange Fruit. And I know there was quite an uproar when that song was played back then. So tonight, thoughts from a chess grandmaster, what we can learn from chess to help change in today's world of civil unrest. Our guest is Maurice Ashely. He's made history as the first African-American grandmaster in chess. He's also an author, a motivational speaker, iPhone app developer, ESPN commentator, and a three-time national championship coach. He seems to have a unique slant in many areas of life, so I'm hoping that we'll talk about his perspective and how we might actually utilize some chess principles to apply them to essential life lessons and personal growth. Maurice has received multiple community service awards from city governments, universities, and community groups for his work. And in recognition of his immense contribution to the game, he was inducted into the U.S. Chess Hall of Fame in 2016, the Brooklyn Technical High School Hall of Fame in 2018. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we dive into, all the things that I want to talk to you about, I'm wondering if you can just give people a bit of an overview of how your life choices led to becoming a grandmaster. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. What's your story?
It's probably a lot like most grandmasters. We got hooked on the game. I got hooked on the game as a teenager in Brooklyn. And once you get hooked, it's like an addiction, an obsession. It's infectious. You can't stop playing it. All I wanted to do was read about chess, study chess, play chess. It was just this thing that, you fall in love, you've done it, right? You know what it feels like. And that it was for me. So I didn't even have a choice, really. It was just, this is what I wanted to do. And
what was the intrigue? What was that addiction or that draw, that compulsion?
Chess is the addiction. Chess is the fun, right? First, I was playing chess in high school with my friends. And I lost to this one friend of mine. And I'm very competitive. My family's very competitive. My sister's a world champion boxer. My brother's a world champion kickboxer. So we're a very competitive family. And anyway, as a teenager, I was competitive then, even so. And so I lost to this friend of mine. I happened to see a chess book. And once you get hooked on this game, there's just something about it, especially my mind suited the game. There was something about being able to solve the problems and the challenge, the mental kind of just extension of yourself that you were able to say, wow, this is a really cool game. I want to know more. And so I kept going.
And would you agree with, I've heard people say that it literally stretches the imagination that the human brain's capable of. Would you say that's one of the skills necessary to be a brilliant chess player? To see what's not.
It's only one skill.
Yeah.
It's only one skill. The fact is, chess is a thinking game, right? You can't play it without thinking. It's not like you can just sort of drop down any move and think you're playing on intuition and, I just had this crazy idea. Your crazy idea will be punished. It's got to be thought through. You've got to come up with moves that are unexpected for your opponent as well. So you've got to get into the mind of your opponent, which is something I think we'll touch on a little bit later. But chess is absolutely a decision-making game where you have to make good decisions on every move and you have to challenge your opponent on every single move. And that stretches you. You can't just play basic ideas that people are going to just, that's easy. You have to get deep. And it's that digging, it's that search for truth that really disciplines you and adds all those wonderful benefits that the game provides.
Which sort of takes us to, you and I spoke the other night about strategy. And I know for most people, the idea of strategy is you've decided a reaction in advance. I do A, you do B, I do C, you do D. But you had a bit of a different take on it when you talked about strategy that I thought was quite amazing. Can you share some more about that? Do you know what I'm talking about? What you
Yes, a lot of
Yeah,
people think of strategy as chess players as we see 10, 15 moves ahead, right?
right.
Well, in a complex space like chess, that's impossible to do all the time. There are limited situations when it's just direct, it's clear, and the path is easy, and you have to calculate it. It's like, this is what you ought to be doing, and you can see forcing moves on either side. But the reality is when you're talking about a game like chess where there are 3 billion possibilities after only the first 4 moves, and then you start extending beyond that, no human brain, forget it, can possibly calculate that much. Even computers haven't solved the game. So
Right.
that you can forget about that. What strategy is for us is finding the core characteristics of a situation and then trying to figure out how you best proceed from there. So it's more like what you want to do is strategy, where tactics are how you do it. Now, for us as chess players, we dig into that, the different elements on the game, whether it's where pieces are distributed, where the pawns are, how safe is a king, for example, weak squares on the board. We start seeing just the elements in a given situation that give us the clues to where we want to go. And then from there, you start to fashion ideas. But the reality is your opponent knows the same things. So they're not going to give you what you want. So it's an ever-changing environment because it's action and reaction perpetually. And that is what makes the fun of the game, but also what makes you have to change your strategy constantly based on the situation that is presented in front of you and changes as you try to map things out. It's just always this ever fresh direction. You have to be ready to be flexible to go in.
Right. Which sound like tremendous life skills. What you just described feels like you've got to be present. You've got to be in the moment. You've got to be in relationship. I mean, you're just so awake and alive. Is that
is
part of?
absolutely right. You nailed it on the head. You nailed it on the head. You talk about chess skills, you talk about life skills, because that idea you just said of being present in the moment, one of the things that we do in chess, it's kind of funny. We often do this in life where we're all about ourselves. We're locked into who we are, my ideas. I think this, I think that, I know this, I know that. You know what? The world is so complex. What you think you know is probably not even true. I mean, facts change. Facts have a half-life, and they change every so often, and we have to adjust to those new circumstances. But the most important thing you can do is be present to the moment and try to be as present as possible to other people's ideas. What do they have to present? Because if you get locked in your own head, you're already lost, and you already lost the game. Right. So it's very important to always be present in the moment and let the rest take care of itself.
You had said during your interview with Trevor Noah that I guess he had asked you what was the most important thing about chess? Was that how he phrased it? But your answer was brilliant.
Most important lesson you learned from chess. So you tell people about chess.
Yeah. So tell us your most important lesson you learned from chess.
Well, there are tons of lessons, right? There are so many things that you get in terms of being patient, in terms of trying to plan ahead while being flexible, as I mentioned. But for me, the most important and the hardest, by far, the hardest lesson is to recognize that the other person's ideas are at least as good as, if not more important than your own. Our ideas are easy. We've got them. They're in our minds. It doesn't take
their opinions.
That, right? It's so easy. I just start thinking, and this is what I think. Right. But the other person's ideas, that might as well be another planet, right? A chasm between us and the other. And to try to really understand the people around us, that by itself is a challenge. Even people we know well. To try to understand people in the community, to try to understand people far away, living in different countries, to try to understand people with different backgrounds. This is the real challenge of the human existence, as far as I'm concerned. The hardest thing to do, to get outside of your own head and to hear other people's ideas, to try to understand them well, that you can actually explain their ideas back to them. Mm-hmm. To do that skill, man, it's chess training all the time, right? Because when we play chess, I've got to understand what you want to do. I've got to fashion a strategy and plan against what you're doing. And so getting inside your head is critically important, but it's so hard. We're so lazy.
How come? How come it's so hard, really?
Because we're lazy, we're insular, we have our own perspective. The reality, in fact, is it's virtually impossible because we're locked inside our own skin, our own flesh, our own bodies. We're not fully empathic because we do see from behind these eyes. You know, it's like hearing your own voice for the first time on the radio, right? Or on a recording, and you go, what's that? That's my voice. Well, those of us in the media have had this experience. Now we're used to hearing our voices. But at first you go, wait, that's not how I sound. Why? Because you're hearing yourself from inside your own head. And that's generally the case in life. And that makes it extremely difficult to have that as a perpetual state of being, to think about the other person's ideas first and then fashion your responses and your handling of situations constantly. That's really very, very difficult to do.
And nothing could be more valuable, it sounds to me, right now in this current climate than what you just described. Like if we could stretch to understand how other people are thinking and feeling rather than react and give our opinions and get into battle and create these camps. So let me toss that. Let's see if we can segue gracefully to the world situation, because that's really what I want to talk about. As much as I'm in awe of your achievements, and I have heard too that you're very humble and that you love to give back. We'll talk about that again, maybe near the end of the show. But I would love to segue to, when you look at the world today and everything that's going on, what do you see? What's your perception?
I see exactly that. I see people dividing themselves into camps, people having specific ideas about the world, about how things are, that restrict what they can see in other people, and also restrict how they can understand other people and situations that people are going through. And you see this divisiveness that's just, it's horrible, right? Humans should be a family. We're a giant family on this planet, and yet we treat ourselves like tribes running to our silos. And it just makes it very difficult to get as much accomplished in a holistic way that will allow us to grow personally and allow the planet to be healthy and whole. It's a very difficult thing to see right now as somebody who thinks sensitively about how people feel and how each individual ought to grow. It's really stifling, this environment. And we have to get out of it somehow, but it's been extraordinarily difficult to do. I'm not sure that recent events will help or harm or accelerate or not, but you have to be optimistic about what's possible for the human family.
When you think about systemic racism and everybody understanding what that really means and the history, I wonder if that would be helpful just to do sort of a recap, because I just saw the 13th, that film, the documentary, which everybody needs to see. That's a no-brainer. Ava DuVernay is the director. And so that's talking about the 13th Amendment. So when slavery was abolished, supposedly, which it seems like it never really was, it just went underground. And I wonder if we could just recap. Can we do that? The history there for people who may not understand that it really wasn't abolished. Although the 13th Amendment said it was, the exception was unless you're a criminal. And so then began this whole convict leasing where they were using, because I could be wrong on the number, but I think it was like 3 million or 4 million slaves were freed. So where are those people, where's that labor? And kind of, again, looking at this whole thing economically. Can we do that? Can we go through the sort of that to Jim Crow, to mass incarceration?
We can. It's hard to encapsulate 400 years of history without us having maybe 400 hours. But in broad strokes, if you will, and it's important to recognize it's just broad strokes. What happened, we know. Africans were brought forcibly to the Western Hemisphere, other places as well, no question. There was the East African slave trade as well, so they ended up in Arab countries as well. But on this side of the world, Africans were brought by force to work as slaves. They weren't compensated for their labor. They helped build wealth in the country, enormous wealth for the people who they were working for. And they were also not allowed to develop flower as full human beings, not allowed to read. Learning to read was a crime that was punishable, however the slave master felt. They felt that even learning how to read was something that would harm the African. It would make them actually think that they had hope for a better life, which that was not going to be the case. And they might potentially rebel as well. So that happened over hundreds of years. And then if we may jump to 1865, the Civil War comes about in 1861, the Civil War in the United States. 1865, you end the Civil War, and then over the next few years, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment give abolish slavery, give citizenship, and give the right to vote. So all those things come together. The slaves that were freed at the time thought, wow, they can't believe it. Can you even imagine a moment like that in history? People like Frederick Douglass, for example, have been fighting for years, and everybody should read the biography of Frederick Douglass, because he was way ahead of his time, an incredible human being, and everything he had to say was absolutely spot on and could be applied to today. But to watch, suddenly you're free to do whatever you want, except you had already given tons of wealth, right, to the white ruling class. And you didn't have any. So as African Americans tried then to accrue wealth, severe obstacles got thrown in their way, whether it was and it all was Jim Crow laws, basically, difficulty in getting proper housing, difficulty in proper land, difficulty in getting properly educated. The vote was stymied at every turn. They made grandfather laws. If your grandfather didn't vote, you couldn't vote. But my grandfather was a slave. They couldn't vote. How is this ever going to stop? So that took from 1865 to 1965, the segregation and Jim Crow laws that affected people in severe ways. Then 1965 comes, and civil rights legislation, Dr. King, Rosa Parks, many people in the freedom movement, finally get this pushed through, and you get 1965. Now, 1965 is already within our lifetimes, right? Many of us, anyway. And the country now thinks everything's good. You got your rights. It's all, mashed potatoes and gravy after this. Mm-hmm. But it's not. You still have practices like redlining, where banks would not lend to African Americans in certain neighborhoods. They literally drew the red line and said, we're not giving loans to people who want to buy homes in this area. You still had de facto segregation if it was not entrenched in law. You had places that said, we don't want you to live here. If you try to live here, you might get rocks thrown in your houses, at your windows. You had substandard education, because now that you had your freedom, but property taxes pay for schools. And if you're poor, you're not going to get the same level of education as people who had wealth. So you had inequalities, as you mentioned, in the treatment in the justice system. African Americans were considered less than. So that wasn't just going to be a light switch that suddenly police officers and law enforcement were going to say, oh, we thought they were criminals, now we think they're saints. How does that happen instantly because a law was enacted? So if you take all of this that was embedded in the core of the system and fast forward it over the years, you'll see that it was impossible to just write a law and transform the globe, transform the opportunities people had. It takes a lot more than that. But as we have seen, that simply hasn't happened. It hasn't happened in full. Not to say there hasn't been progress. Those people didn't sacrifice their lives in the civil rights movement and beyond to not have any progress. But to have the kind of full progress you need to have what we call equality, that simply takes a lot more investment in many ways. And so these problems have remained systemic to the system, and to our political life, to our everyday life. And you see it flare up perpetually. And unfortunately, it continues to flare up. And as we've seen recently, it just exploded.
Hmm. Well, Angela Davis said that historically, when you look at reform, it actually inevitably leads to more repression. What do you think of that? That something is being called for other than this reshaping of the system, something more than uh, reform, something that it needs to crumble, I guess would be that something needs to dissolve here. And I think the line I heard was temporary Band-Aids on problems that need surgery
I think
was a
that's a very
metaphor.
eloquent way of putting it. Absolutely. And, some people think that the system just has to go, but you can't. How do you make that happen?
Mm,
And go. So it, when you look at these problems, it's absolutely true. Uh, and part of it simply has to do with the fact that those in power think it's a natural state, right? You don't just cede power. You don't just cede resources. You don't say, you know what, I'm just going to give you a whole bunch of money to try and give you loans, maybe even just free money, the way they're doing now, right? During this COVID era where trillions are coming out of nowhere. But we're going to address this issue by getting all of you homes, making sure all the schools are fantastic, right? Dealing with the racism in the police departments, wherever they are, or any issues that have to do with police brutality that concern you. Those in power positions, they could see the inequalities, but it's just not really, generally speaking, acceptable to the populace at large. Like, why should we do that? So you can argue, look, 400 years, it was unequal. Now you just write a law and you don't want to do anything else to really address this imbalance. You realize then, how can it really change? How can it change without a Herculean effort, Herculean contribution to make that happen? And so I can understand the frustration of somebody like Angela Davis. I don't agree with riots and looting. Clearly that's wrong in a civil society, but you can understand that impulse when you have been repressed, when a knee has been on your neck and the necks of your families for so long, and you feel that anger burning. That small percentage, you got 99 protesters, but people will look at the one looter, right? So you can amplify that. But that percentage that says, I'm sick and tired of this, and they react, you can understand why that would happen. And it's unfortunate because we really need to address this in a way that doesn't cause this to be another generation of lost souls.
hmm I know a lot of people are demonstrating things like taking the knee, but it's being called performative. I don't know if you've heard this, that there's a distinction being made in the words that are being used to become an ally, certainly from a Black Lives Matter perspective, what it means to be a real ally versus a performative ally. And so things like, especially on social media, taking the knee is being seen as a performance. And mostly the anger that I'm hearing is towards white liberals. Like it's like, okay, we know what Trump's about. We know what rednecks are about. We know racism. But what the anger I'm hearing mostly is about people who are saying, but I'm not that. That's not me. And here's my demonstration. But the demonstration is completely still comfortable. And so I just wonder what your take on this is in terms of like talk to white liberals here, especially since we're Conscious Living Radio. We can even throw in the word spiritual liberal leftist people of ideologies. What would you say?
Frankly, I'm almost always uncomfortable with labels.
With
labels. Liberals, conservatives, these Democrats, Republicans. To me, it's silly. It's another way of dividing humans. Now, I know it exists and people have their ideologies and say, well, this is what I am. This is what they are. That's another way of creating the other. Mm-hmm. And once you create the other, then you're stuck because you're going to just drop everybody in the same pool, in the same basket. And then there's no way to even listen to them because before they even speak, you think you know the answer to what they're going to say. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's the case, right? You say, I am this, therefore, as soon as you speak, I know what you're going to say. And that's a sad state. I should never know exactly what you're going to say. You should be that flexible, that open to change, that you may say something that just shocks me. Oh, wow, I didn't expect that one. But there's a certain predictability in people's ideologies. But speaking about this performative aspect, and again, I won't speak to the anger people have. I'll speak to the authenticity. What authenticity means is that you truly understand a situation. Not only do you understand the situation abstractly, but you understand it empathically. This is hard, right? To really dig deep into what people are feeling, to understand that if you are truly understanding someone's pain, then your action, if you're an empathic person, if you're a caring person, would go beyond the performative, would go beyond just a hashtag. That can't be enough. Taking a knee can't be enough. You recognize the hundreds of years of pain that people have suffered and that the current environment still suffer. Then there's no way for you to just do the minimum. But that's the problem. People just do the minimum. I can just show my support. I can post it on Instagram.
Right.
And that's great. I mean, sure, you should show your support. Absolutely. But if you really felt pain for the other, the principle of love the other the way you love yourself, then it's sort of like, people, your family members, what would you do if it was your child? If it was your brother? If it was your sister? Would you just write a hashtag? Boom. Do you just take a knee? You act differently. And that level of empathy and caring for the human family, it's clearly very difficult for people to do. And the mere fact that we act in this way, I am about doing the best for myself, doing the best for my family, doing the best for my friends, being a good person in that way, that by itself is destructive. And I know it sounds weird, but once you do that, and many people like you do that, then you end up coalescing around your group because it's your friends, family, and yourself. And that group has its own power that by its very actions really don't represent the needs of others unlike you.
Right. And so concretely, you're talking about turning the me into a we, right? How? What can we specifically do to not do that cocooning, this is my bubble, here's what I'm taking care of, but to actually broaden our understanding into a oneness and a we consciousness? What do you think a really specific thing is people can do?
Every single day, pursue trying to understand others who are not like you. It's a pursuit. It will never end. But every single day, follow that pursuit. It's got to be prescriptive, meditative. It's got to be something that you value and treasure so highly that you understand that when you're not doing it, and it pains you. It pains you to be that selfish, right? And I know it's hard. It's hard because we got stuff to do. I got to go to work. I got to feed my kids, right? I got so many things on the list of activities I got to do. And you also want me to try to understand the pain of others. That's the difficulty. So I get it. I get it. I got kids too. I've got a life I'm trying to live as well. But unless you really pursue that, whether it's through reading the right materials, biographies of those people who have gone through some things that tell you a story, commentary by people who are different from you, books by groups that are different from you, and also meeting people, sitting down, having those conversations, being willing to go to communities where you may not be that comfortable because you're not the majority in that community. Taking those steps, I know it's hard. But if we don't do that work, then we'll be stuck again in our own silos.
Well said. Police bias. Let's move to the police, since that was such a provocative visual awareness. I mean, to anyone, it's been going on for a long, long time, but I think this George Floyd's funeral was today, and watching part of that and listening to people speak was incredibly moving. But I want to kind of take a look at the current civil unrest and how it's connected not only, I mean, it's almost like a triple strike, right? You've got the police brutality that occurs, you've got unemployment all amidst COVID, right? So it really took the cover off the disparities between the haves and the have-nots, and of course, therefore, racial pieces as well. I wonder if you can comment to that.
Well, police bias, it's easy to paint police as the bad guys and say it's police bias. But police don't live in a vacuum. It's not like you pick up the police, separate them, and put them aside, and all of a sudden you've got all these people who are biased. If it were that simple, then you could say, oh, they're the problem, and that's it. The problem is we're all biased, right? They're within a family, a society. We're biased. It's rife with bias. We're all prejudiced a certain way. We have to fight against this prejudice, to not label the other and think that we know the characteristics of other people based on some limited data points that we get. I was talking to a friend of mine last night, a concerned white friend. We ended up speaking for 2.5 hours into the night as she, so sincere, tried to understand many of these ideas and wanted me to explain them to her. And the thing was, she was as innocent as they would come, and therefore as dangerous as they come. So she can't see what she doesn't see. She's trying to understand, but she just simply, there's that block. And so she's never experienced what she needs to experience to be able to quickly articulate the pain of others. And so to demonize the police is not enough. It's to actually attack the general bias that exists, that allows for the police to be able to do what they have done over all these years, because they're inclined that way. The ones who are, we're not even talking about good cops, bad cops. We're talking about everybody. And we're not talking, and I'm not targeting the police per se. The system itself has this challenge. It goes beyond the police. It goes to everyone. And you don't know what you don't know. And then you have to explore that. When we start attacking the bias itself and recognize that we're all part of it, I'm biased as well. Everybody is. It's just the human nature we're seeing from this side, and we have to fight that bias. Then you understand that we have to all participate in the overhaul of the problem, of the system, so that we can do a better job. Now, the thing about police, the issue with police that's very specific to police, is that they have so much power. They have the power of life and death. They have the power to incarcerate. They're not just the average citizen who could have bias but may not have power to affect people's lives in such a dramatic way. And that's when the conversation gets heated. Because if you can pull a gun and kill me, you can take your knee and just leave it there. And people are begging for you to stop, and you don't have to because you're empowered in your mind to go the way. Now you're traumatizing the community. And so that's when the reins of those who are powerful have to be curtailed, because the effect that they have on the community and on the society at large is outsized. It's amplified. And that's why it has to be addressed. Those areas have to be addressed. But the truth is, everyone has to be addressed.
How do you see that happening? Do you see defunding? Do you see a different system in terms of policing? Do you think it's time for something radical, or is it, that milder? Because I know a lot of people are going, yep, let's get rid of the bad apples. And there's a much more moderate approach. And then there's a radical one talking about completely defunding and creating a new system. What are your thoughts?
You get words like radical and moderate and their labels as to how one should act. And, I back up and I say, let's go backwards for a second. What is policing? Right? Policing is keeping communities safe. What policing ought to be, right? Keeping communities safe. That sounds like the job of the police. Mm-hmm. Now, there are things that police do. For example, they get called in a situation when there's someone that has a mental issue. mental duress, or maybe just, belongs in a mental institution because they just, they have a condition. Why are police called for that? Right? Why do people call the police for something like that? You have a situation where someone is laying in her college dorm, or she's in the common area. She's asleep, as we had the woman at Yale, I believe it was, who was sleeping in the common area. And the woman, another student at Yale, didn't appreciate, I'm not sure if it was Yale or Harvard, I think it was Yale, so forgive me, my college friends, if I get it wrong. But she's sleeping in the dorm. Why did a woman who didn't think she should be there sleeping call the police on that? Right? We have a knee-jerk reaction because we think the police should be the catch-all for everything. We had two African-American males standing in Starbucks waiting for a meeting. The people in Starbucks thought they were loitering. They called the police. Why do we do that? They didn't do anything. There was no present danger. Why do you call the police for everything? Why are the police forced to have this responsibility? What we have to do is stop and think about what should the responsibilities of the police actually be, because they're about keeping safe communities. You should call the police for reasons where it seems like clear and present danger, not because you think police should be called for everything. And I think that mindset alone in the citizenry, it's gotten to that point that if you now can reflect back and think, what ought the police be doing? Where do you feel that it's right for the police to get involved? Then you'll realize that you may not need to budget all those dollars to police officers. Give them a chance to do their jobs bravely in a different way. Start funding mental health professionals who could come on the scene when there's a problem, right? Mm-hmm. Think about community strategies that may need to be funded to keep your own community safe. Start thinking about the other reasons why there might be issues. For example, gang-related violence is responsible for so much harm in societies. How do you address why people get into gangs in the first place? Start addressing the financial conditions that cause people to feel desperate enough to do those kind of illegal activities. Now, when you start addressing the bigger picture, you'll realize the proper place police should have. That's the problem for us, I think, is when you start isolating the inequity in power structures, you think, let's target police, defund them, and then you don't address what really is causing this in the first place. And until you get root causes, you're going nowhere. You'll be calculating numbers 10 years from now. This is where my heart is sad. 10 years from now, you'll be calculating numbers. Oh yeah, we saw a drop in crime. Police brutality fell. But what about education? What about economic opportunity? What about incarceration rates, et cetera, et cetera? What about those things? Have they been addressed? You cannot address the problem in isolation. You have to address it as a whole.
If you were to sum up your philosophy, your North Star, your guiding values, or whatever it is as a human being that I like North Star. It's like, that's your compass. You've said it there. What would it be?
Love your neighbor as yourself. It's actually really pretty simple. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I might even go a bit further. Love your neighbor more than yourself. And it's so important that we recognize that other people, we live in a social world. We live as part of a family. No person is an island. We have to contribute to society in a way, in ways big and small. Some of us can do more, some of us can do less. But it's important to realize that we're part of this family, that we're part of a web, wonderfully complex web, that means that it's critical and vital that we understand other people, their pain, their motivations, their desires for living. And if you do that, generally you just don't go wrong.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the projects or upcoming events that you want our listeners to know about, or how they can find out what you're up to and kind of stay involved with the work that you're doing?
Well, I'm a chess player, as you mentioned at the top, so I'm a chess commentator as well. We do events all the time Right now we're doing a big event for some of the top players on the planet called Clutch Chess. It's something I designed, $40 million, more than $40 million prize fund for excitement that everybody's locked inside. So we're doing online chess, and it's amazing boom that's going on right now. So that can be, you can find that. Clutch Chess is all you need to actually research. You can find it on YouTube or at uschesschamps.com. And it's very exciting. We got the best players on the planet. We got the world champion, Magnus Carlsen, who's playing, the #1 American, Fabiana Caruana, who happens to be the #2 player in the world as well. So that's happening as we speak. Actually just came off a broadcast. So I'm excited about that. Another thing I'm working on that unfortunately has to be on hold right now, projects to bring chess to various countries in Africa, particularly West African countries, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. And that's because I believe in the value of chess. I believe in improving decision-making and thinking in young people. And so I bring that message to them. And I visited many times now. I've been to 8 countries in Africa. And I just wanted to spread those skills, techniques to folks so they can empower themselves. Otherwise, you can go to my website, mauriceashely.com, and find out more of what's going on.
And we'll have all this information on consciousliving.org as well, and links to your website. I'm wondering, back to chess here, just in terms of life lessons, one of the things, I wonder if you have some insight around pain and obstacles and somehow paralleling your approach to pain and obstacles or struggle and chess.
No pain, no gain. Obstacles allow you to grow. It's very simple. One thing we talk about in chess is losing is learning. Losing is learning. If you're not ready to lose, you're not ready to learn. You've got to be in a place where you're comfortable with loss, comfortable with discomfort.
Right.
For me, we talked about this life philosophy. Another thing that's important for me, incredibly important, the way I see the world, is to embrace uncertainty. The world is so complex. Everybody wants to know for certain. They want some set truth. And for the longest time since my teenage years, I've learned this art of embracing uncertainty and being comfortable with discomfort, with not knowing. You have to be there as a chess player because there's new positions all the time and new things to learn. But you have to be there as a human because the world 500 years ago is not the world today. It's not the world 500 years from now. People are going to look back at us 500 years and go, those people were dummies. What were they thinking, right?
Right.
That's actually going to happen. They're going to say, okay, there were some good discoveries they'll keep. There's going to be so many new ones. And we're going to look so ancient to that group. And we might even look sad. The treatment that we actually visited upon people will look like barbarians. And so we have to be comfortable in our discomfort. We have to be comfortable with uncertainty and live our lives as such. Don't just think you know and therefore be able to tell others what's going on. And that's prescriptive living.
Yeah, it's almost like saying I don't know is in society seems to be a bad thing or a weak thing, and yet it is such a sign of strength, because if you land in I don't know, then you're going to listen and be open for whatever it is that wants to come through, so you will take the appropriate action. So there's an openness to it, true?
Yes, absolutely. There's the point where you know what you know, or at least you think you know what you know. And then there's the one where you know what you don't know. But the hard one is when you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And that one, boy, that's the rub. And that one is where a lot of people are not comfortable. You're blind to it. You're like fish in water, not realizing that you're swimming in water, right? That's the medium you're in. And there's so many tacit assumptions that you don't know you have as you're moving along the planet, that when it's pointed out, your eyes are shocked, right? Like, what? I was thinking that? And that's where you want to be. For me, that's exciting, actually. For me, it's exciting when somebody points something out and I go, wow, I never thought of it like that. It means I'm growing. It means I have the opportunity to grow. It means I'm being stimulated as an entity on this planet to look broadly and not just look inside myself for all the answers.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've only got a few minutes left. What else do you think is important for people listening right now who want to support what's going on, want to be helpful? We've touched, I think, on a number of really good tools in terms of perception and the way to locate oneself, so you can look at the situation from an open place of listening, really, yeah, and becoming comfortable with the unknown. What else? Have we missed anything, Maurice? Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't covered?
Obviously we could talk for hours,
Mm.
but the principles that we've talked about so far, I feel like I've said the most important things I wanted to say. There is an idea that would start a whole different chain of conversation maybe, but there's an idea that I think I want to show as an example that may help people may stimulate people to go down a path of learning. And the idea is something that I'd known before, but what was really struck me recently, last few days. And this is the idea of the tyranny of the majority. And it comes from many philosophers from the past, historians, Alexis de Tocqueville in Democracy in America, John Stuart Mills in On Liberty, talking about how we understand democracy is a wonderful thing and people get to vote. But when there's a majority in a democracy, that majority can impose their will, not maliciously, just naturally on minorities, on those who are numerically just underrepresented. So again, all you have to do is care about yourself, care about your family, and care about friends. And if that group doesn't include a vast number of the other in a minority group, then that simple action, those actions will be tyrannical. You'll multiply, those actions will multiply into your group, and your group will care about the things that are most important to that group. And they'll be less concerned by the concerns of the minority within that culture. And as a result, you'll be imposing a set of values and principles and history that the other may not believe in, may not respect, or may not want to do. And so I think it's important when you understand that even in something as wonderful as democracy itself, there could be flaws that show up in the actual practice of it, that it's that kind of radical idea that hits you over the head and says, well, wait a minute, if actually my basic actions are potentially destructive to others, what should I be inspecting? What do I do? How do I address that? What are the steps I take to always be listening? Because the minority, whatever the minority voice is in any group, right? Any group, they need to be protected because the majority can be tyrannical just through natural behavior. And so we have a lot of work to do. That's all I can say. We've got a lot of work to do. It's each one going through that self-introspection in order to get to that place where we can care about all of us as a human family.
Right. Thank you for joining us tonight. Really, really appreciate you being here, taking the time. Yeah, it's been great. We've been speaking with Maurice Ashely, the first Black Grandmaster of chess, which I honestly think is amazing, even though you're humble, very humble about it. I think that's super exciting. And thank you for all your insight and sharing your thoughts with us.
Yeah, thank you. That was brilliant. Yeah,
And
I was just mesmerized listening because I had so many questions coming up, and he just kept answering as they kept coming up. And one of them was about how many billion different moves there was in a game of chess, and how that just really relates to life. How many moves do we got? And yeah, thank you for that.
And the last thing I want to leave our listeners with, Cineplex at the moment is offering free films. I'm a big fan of the arts and film. Free films focused on understanding Black stories. So they're not charging for the rental. You can just go on cineplex.store.com, and so many films, like just incredible films of Black artists and filmmakers that you want to check out. I'm watching Just Mercy right now, which is based on a true story, pretty amazing. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.